It's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I'm recording this chapter in this story, a little late because I wasn't feeling that good yesterday. And so I'm doing it today, and then later I will do the one for today that's supposed to be for today. So we're on Farmer Boy. I've really enjoyed the story, and the chapter we're on now is called Cobbler. Cobbler is someone that would make shoes. Now, sometimes we eat cobblers, like peach cobbler's really good. Cobbler. Mother was worrying and scolding because the cobbler had not come. Almanzo's moccasins were worn to rags, and Royal had outgrown last year's boots. He had slit them all around to get his feet in them. Their feet ached with cold, but nothing could be done until the cobbler came. It was almost time for Royal and Elijah Jane and Alice to go to the academy, and they had no shoes. And still the cobbler didn't come. Mother's shears went snickety-snick through a web of beautiful sheep gray cloth she had woven. She cut and fitted and basted, that's with big stitches, and sewed, and she made Royal a handsome new suit with a great coat to match. She made him a cap with flaps that buttoned just like button caps. For Elijah Jane, she made a new dress of wine-colored cloth, and she made Alice a new dress of indigo blue. That's like the color of blue jeans. The girls were ripping their old dresses and bonnets, sponging and pressing them and sewing them together again on the other side to look like new. In the evenings, Mother's knitting needles flashed and clicked, making new stockings for them all. She knit so fast that the needles got hot from rubbing together. But they could not have new shoes unless the cobbler came in time. He didn't come. The girls' skirts hid their old shoes, but Royal had to go to the academy in his fine suit with last year's boots that were all slit around and showed his white socks through it. He couldn't be helped. The last morning came. Father and Almanzo did the chores. Every window of the house blazed with candlelight, and Almanzo missed Royal in the barn. So when they went to academy, those were places they lived, like when people go to college. Royal and the girls were all dressed up at breakfast. No one ate much. Father went to hitch up, and Almanzo lugged the carpet bags downstairs. Now, carpet bags are what we call suitcases now. He wished Alice wasn't going away. The sleigh bells came jingling to the door, and Mother laughed and wiped her eyes with her apron. They all went to the sled. The horses pawed and shook jingles from the bells. Alice tucked the lap rope over her bulging skirts, and Father said, "Let the horses go." The sleigh bells by and by turned into the road. Alice's black-filled face looked back, and she said, "Goodbye, goodbye." Almanzo did not like that day very much. And I think this is probably the picture of the academy. That'd be like a high school. Everything seemed large and still and empty. He ate dinner all alone with Father and Mother. Chore time was earlier because Royal was gone. Almanzo hated to go into the house and not see Alice. He even missed Elijah Jane. After he went to bed, he lay awake and wondered what they were doing. 5 long miles away. Now, we don't think of that very far now because we can just hop in our car. But if you had to hitch up the horses or ride a horse with the saddle, it was a long way. Next morning, the cobbler came. Mother went to the door and said, "Well, this is a pretty time to be coming, I must say, 3 weeks late, and my children as good as barefoot." But the cobbler was so good-natured that she couldn't be angry for long. It wasn't his fault. He had been kept 3 weeks at one house making shoes for a wedding. The cobbler was a fat, jolly man. His cheeks and his stomach shook when he chuckled. He set up his cobbler bench in the dining room by the window and opened his box of tools. Already he had Mother laughing at his jokes. Father brought last year's tanned hides, and he and the cobbler discussed them all morning. Dinner time was gay. That means happy. The cobbler told all the news. He praised Mother's cooking and told jokes till Father roared and Mother wiped her eyes. Then the cobbler asked Father what he should make first. Father said, "I guess you better begin with the boots for Almanzo." What? Almanzo could hardly believe it. He had wanted boots for so long he thought he must wear moccasins until his feet stopped growing so fast. "You'll spoil the boy, James," Mother said, but Father answered, "He's big enough now to wear boots." Almanzo could hardly wait for the cobbler to begin. First, the cobbler looked at all the wood in the woodshed. He wanted a piece of maple, perfectly seasoned with a fine, straight grain. When he found it, he took his small saw and he sawed off 2 thin slabs. One was exactly 1 inch thick and the other was a 1/2 inch thick. He measured and sawed the corners square. He took the slabs to his cobbler's bench and sat down and opened the box of his tools. It was divided into little compartments, and every kind of cobbler's tool was laid neatly inside it. The cobbler laid the thick slab of maple wood on the bench before him. He took a long, sharp knife and he cut the whole top of the slab into tiny ridges. Then he turned it around and cut the ridges the other way, making tiny pointed peaks. He laid the edge of a thin, straight knife in the groove between the 2 ridges and gently tapped it with a hammer. A thin strip of wood split off, notched all on one side. He moved the knife and tapped it till all the wood was in stripes. Then, holding a strip by one end, he stuck his knife in the notches. And every time he struck, a shoe pin split off, or shoe peg split off. Every peg was 1 inch long, 1/8 of an inch square, and pointed on the end. The thinner pieces of maple he made into pegs. Remember, they didn't often use nails then. They would use little wooden pegs. And those pegs were 1/2 an inch long. Now the cobbler was ready to measure Almanzo for his boots. Almanzo took off his moccasins and his socks and stood on a piece of paper while the cobbler carefully drew around his feet with his big pencil. Then the cobbler measured his feet in every direction and wrote down the figures. He did not need Almanzo anymore now, so Almanzo helped Father husk corn. He had a little husking peg like Father's big one. He buckled the strap around his right mitten, and the wooden peg stood up like a second thumb between his thumb and fingers. He and Father sat on the milking stands in the cold barnyard by the corn shocks. They pulled ears of corn from the stalks. They took the tips of the dry husk between thumb and husking pegs and snipped the husk off an ear of corn. They tossed the bare ears into the bushel baskets. The stalks and rustling long leaves they laid in piles. The young stalk would eat the leaves. Now my sheep, when I had sheep, they loved to eat the leaves and the stalks from corn. When they had husked all the corn they could reach, they hitched their stools forward and slowly worked their way deeper into the tasseled shocks of corn. Wow. First the phone, now my clock. Husks and stalks piled up behind them. Father emptied the full baskets into the corn bins, and the bins were filling up. It was not very cold in the barnyard. The big barns broke the cold winds. They blocked them, and the dry snow shook off the corn stalks. Almanzo's feet were aching, but he thought of his new boots. He could hardly wait till supper time to see what the cobbler had done. That day the cobbler had whittled out 2 wooden laths, just the shape of Almanzo's feet. They filled upside down over a tall peg on his bench, and they would come apart in halves. Next morning the cobbler cut soles, that's the bottom part, from the thick middle of the cowhide, and inner soles from the thin leather near the edge. He cut uppers from the softest leather. Then he waxed his thread. With his right hand he pulled a length of linen thread across a wad of black cobbler's wax in his left palm, and he rolled the thread under his palm down the front of the leather apron. Then he pulled it and rolled it again. The axe made a crackling sound, and the cobbler's arms went out and in and out and in till the thread was shiny black and stiff with wax. Then he laid a stiff hog bristle against each end of it, and he waxed and he rolled and he waxed and he rolled till the bristles were fixed fast to the thread, stuck to the thread. At last he was ready to sew. He laid the upper pieces of one boot together and clamped them in a vise. The edges stood up even and firm. With his awl, that's a tool that you can poke holes in, something else in, the cobbler punched a hole through them. He ran 2 bristles through the hole, one on each side, and with his strong arms he pulled the thread tight. He bored another hole, or drilled another hole, ran 2 bristles through and pulled till the wax thread sank into the leather. That was 1 stitch. Now that's a seam, he said. Your feet won't get damp in my boots, even if you go wading in them. I never sewed a seam yet that wouldn't hold out water. Stitch by stitch, he sewed the uppers. When they were done, he laid the soles to soak in water overnight. Next morning, he set up one of the last of his pegs, the sole up. He laid the leather inner sole on it. He drew the upper part of the boot down over it, folding the edges over the sole. Then he laid the heavy sole on top, and there was the boot, upside down on the lasp. Excuse me. The cobbler bored holes with his awl all around the edges of the sole. Into each hole he drove one of the short maple pegs. He made a heel of thick leather and pegged it in place with long maple pegs. The boot was done. The damp soles had to dry overnight. In the morning, the cobbler took out the laths, and with a rasp, he rubbed off the inside ends of the pegs. So he took off the wooden shape of the foot, and then he rubbed so those pegs wouldn't poke in Almanzo's feet. Almanzo put on his boots. They fitted perfectly, and the heels thumped grandly on the kitchen floor. Saturday morning, Father drove to Malone to bring Alice and Royal and Eliza Jane to be measured for their new shoes. Mother was cooking a big dinner for them, and Almanzo hung around the gate, waiting to see Alice again. She wasn't one bit changed. Even before she jumped out of the buggy, she cried, "Oh, Almanzo, you've got new boots!" She was studying to be a fine lady. She told Almanzo all about her lessons in music and department, and she was glad to be home again. Elijah Jane was more bossy than ever. She said Almanzo's boots made too much noise. She even told Mother she was mortified because Father drank tea from his supper. "My land, how else would he cool it?" Mother asked. "It isn't the style to drink out of saucers anymore," Elijah Jane said. "Nice people drink out of cups." "Elijah Jane!" Alice cried. "Be ashamed! I guess Father's as nice as anybody." Mother actually stopped working. She took her hands out of the dishpan and turned around to face Elijah Jane. "Young lady," she said, "if you have to show off your fine education, you tell me where saucers come from." Elijah Jane opened her mouth and shut it and looked foolish. "They come from China," Mother said. "Dutch sailors brought them from China 200 years ago. The first time sailors ever sailed around the Cape of Good Horn and found China. Up to that time, people drank out of cups. They didn't have saucers. Ever since then, they've had saucers and they've drank out of them. I guess a thing that folks have done for 200 years, we can keep on doing. We're not likely to change for a newfangled notion that you got in Malone Academy." That shut Elijah Jane up. Royal did not say much. He put on old clothes and did his share of the chores, but he did not seem interested. That night in bed, he told Almanzo he was going to be a storekeeper. "You're a bigger fool than I be, if you drudge all day on your farms," he said. "I like horses," Almanzo said. "Huh, storekeepers have horses," Royal answered. "They dress up every day and keep clean, and they ride around with a carriage and a pair. There's men in the cities that have coachmen to drive them, in fact." Almanzo did not say anything, but he did not want a coachman. He wanted to break the colts, and he wanted to drive his own horses himself. Next morning, they all went to church together. They left Royal and Elijah Jane and Alice at the academy. Only the cobbler came back to the farm. Every day he whistled and worked at his bench in the dining room till all the boots and shoes were done. He was there 2 weeks. And when he loaded his bench and tools in his buggy and drove away to the next customer, the house seemed empty and still again. That evening, Father said to Almanzo, "Well, son, corn husking's done. What say we make a bobsled for Star and Bright tomorrow?" "Father," Almanzo said, "can I? Will you let me haul wood from the timber in this winter?" Father's eyes twinkled. "What else would you need a bobsled for? That's the end of that chapter. So Amanzo's got new boots in this one. And now he's going to get his own bobsled. What a lucky kid. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house and out of your house, in the day and in the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. All right, bye-bye.